I'm Kelly Lewis.
And I'm Tiffany Jones, and we're your Revenue Insiders.
If you're enjoying the Revenue Insiders, we'd love your support. Follow us, rate, and leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Your feedback helps us grow and reach more listeners like you. Hello. We have one of my favorite people on the episode today, Andy Champion from Sixth Sense. Thank you for joining us. This is a fun episode because Tiffany and I have both worked with Andy. Tiffany worked with Andy at DocuSign. I worked with Andy at Highspot. So I think this is the first guest we've ever had that we both worked with. So
No pressure, Andy.
No pressure, Andy. And Andy is, of course, wearing pink today. We are recording on a Wednesday. He does this. Since I've known him, apparently since his DocuSign days. Tiffany and I both showed up in stripes. So if you are watching us on YouTube or Spotify,
I feel like we belong on a boat today.
Yeah,
maybe.
we do.
Maybe that's the vibes that I'm feeling today.
Yeah.
I didn't get the memo on that, ladies. I mean, come on.
You could have recorded from your boat.
I would have been conflicted, right? Because pink on a Wednesday is a thing for me.
Yeah.
It is.
So maybe pink stripes would have worked.
I'm kind of upset I forgot about it. Otherwise, I would have also worn pink. But
yeah,
it's an off week in the U.S. We had Monday off, and so I think we're all confused on
schedules. Is it even Wednesday this week? I don't know.
Who knows? Who knows?
Thank God we have Andy to tell us it's Wednesday.
Yes. Thank you, Andy.
We had Monday off as well, so we're also confused.
Okay, well, great.
Okay.
Well, Andy, first off, thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
Appreciate having you here. We'll talk about your background here in a minute, but first, one thing that I respect so much about you is you are a wonderful people leader. And I think that is so important in the go-to-market space. When you think about what makes a good people leader and a good revenue leader, what do you think those characteristics are?
Well, the first thing is, I'm not sure I cracked the code, but thank you. That's a huge compliment. You know, I think that, as I say, I don't know if I cracked the code, but I do know that we can all learn and adapt. What are some of the patterns that I see with great leaders that I've worked with and observed? I think one of the first ones is around vulnerability. I think I'm on record of saying before, certainly, do you remember we did the Highspot Leadership Summit? We brought all of our leaders together because we knew that our leaders were actually the leverage to get the growth that we were looking for. And we brought everyone together. And I remember I talked there about one of the jobs of leaders, probably the most important job as a leader, is to understand that you are not paid to be the smartest person in the room. You are paid to create an environment where everybody feels comfortable to have their voice heard, whether they are a verbal communicator or communicate in a different style. Your job is to create that environment where the different ideas can come to the surface, where there is no judgment on those. And the only goal is to ultimately come together with consensus as a group on how you want to proceed. And I remember going back to my time at a company called Yext. I was very lucky to spend some time with a trainer called Barry Ryan, selling through curiosity. And one of his phrases has stuck with me. And I think this sums it up right on the first point. No one of us is as smart as all of us. And as a leader, if all you do is to create an environment where all of those ideas are heard, and they're heard in a psychologically a safe space where you can have an honest debate, you're probably not going to go far wrong. So tip number one, your job is not to be the smartest in the room. Your person in the room, your job is to get all of those voices heard and then to help curate the conversation around the decisions and the task.
I love that. And I think it's so important to elevate people or you don't grow the next layer of leadership. Like if you're always trying to be the smartest person in the room, there's no one else behind you that fills in the gaps as like you have career aspirations to move into the next role. But one of the challenging things I think when you give people that power is they have to be more accountable. Like yes, you cover them as a manager, but like at least from my perspective, that accountability becomes so much more intense on the individual, because when they have an idea and you give them the power to go like speak it or will it into existence, like you also want to hold them accountable for going to do those things next. I'm curious your thoughts, Andy, on like how accountability weaves into that principle for you.
I think that we all need to understand the power of our voice, right? I mean, use today as an example. Here we are having the start of a wonderful conversation, and I'm kind of conscious that there will be people that have chosen to listen to this podcast and give up some of their time, and so I'm feeling a weight of responsibility to try and give some ideas or prompt some thinking to have people stop and challenge maybe some of how they're doing stuff today. But on the accountability stuff, it's like everybody's voice matters, and understand when you use your voice that you are taking up the time and space of others. So use it wisely, be thoughtful about it, be confident in making sure your voice is heard. But again, read the room, think about the context, be open to ideas, right? On the accountability thing, I think it comes back to, again, a principle as a leader is to be really clear about what the task is at hand. And a lot of the things around accountability are actually not around people not wanting to do a good job. I've found in almost 30 years of technology sales and leadership roles that actually the vast majority of people really want to turn up and do a great job. And if we create that space where their voice is heard as leaders, we'll get way more from them. I talk about discretionary effort, right? It's the effort that people put in when nobody else is looking, because the people want to do that. And if you create that space for the voices to be heard, it's much more likely that you're going to get the discretionary effort, Tiffany, as you say, as opposed to always telling, right? That demonstrative leader, you just beat the enthusiasm out of people. But on the accountability piece, to come back to that, a lot of the time when there is an issue that gets under the bucket of accountability, usually when you dig into it, it's about understanding. It's about an understanding of the task at hand, the boundaries that were set, the expectations of what is to be delivered. It's usually not because people aren't putting the effort in and don't want to deliver a good result. It's more about, have you as a leader being crystal clear on what the objective is, what the boundaries, the freedom that people have to operate in, and the timelines and the reporting, the milestones that you set for reporting. And most of the time, confusion and frustration becomes because there's a misalignment on one or more of those things. People misinterpreted what you meant by X and have gone with good faith and tried to execute, but perhaps they've delivered Y. And it can be as nuanced as the language that we use. Being really, really clear about what is expected, crystal clear, and then having the person play it back to you is a really, really important part of driving that accountability.
I think the psychological safety you mentioned earlier is really important too, because I find a lot of people are scared to fail. So they don't try, like they stay away from maybe bringing in people cross functionally that they're not as familiar with, because they aren't sure how that's going to be perceived and if they're on the right path. And that fear of failure is so potent in people, and it prevents them from, like, that discretionary work that you described, from doing it. I think that that's a big piece as well.
Yes, and there is again, I really want to make sure that people listening get a lot of value from this. So there is a framework around this called situational leadership. And what the framework says is, look, if you want to be effective as a leader in developing your people, understand that each person is at a different stage for a different discrete task. And as a leader, our job is to meet our people where they are, based on their experience with that specific task, and to help them with the appropriate type of leadership that they need. So let me bring that into black and white. The first time somebody does a job, they could be a 30-year veteran of the industry, but the first time they're doing a job, you are probably going to want to be much more directive in terms of what is expected, a really simple, clear breakdown of the task, and you'll probably want to have very regular check-ins, versus that same person who's done a different task and they've executed on that impeccably for the last 3 to 5 times. And situational leadership is a framework that allows you to think about where the person is on that task and how you can adjust your leadership to get the most from them.
Yeah, I think that goes back though to understanding and having the EQ to understand where each of the people on your team are, and to give yourself the space to treat everyone a little bit differently. I think when we think about frontline sales managers, we always talk about them as the busiest people on the planet. They have a really tough job. And so I do think it's that being really intentional about treating each of your employees and each of your reps differently and meeting them where they're at. And that takes intentionality.
It does. And again, something as simple as time blocking. Time blocking, allowing yourself the grace as a first line manager, as you say, especially first line management. There is no shortage of where you can invest your time. So give yourself the grace to prepare for your people, because your people are the most important tools that you have available to you to execute the task at hand. And I know, when I first sort of got into sales leadership, I made a couple of mistakes, right? We've all made mistakes. And one of the mistakes I fell into is thinking that, I could just come in and be the super rep. And of course, people would then just watch and learn and absorb. And, sure, some people kind of do. But I learned pretty quickly that that's only got a fairly short runway, right? That's only going to get you so much leverage. And when you start leading teams of 20, 30, 40, 100 people, you can't do that. And the pressure is intense. And one of the best ways to avoid doing that is to give yourself the time to prepare ahead of things, critical meetings like one-to-ones. Be very intentional and thoughtful about the feedback that you give to people. And the SBI framework is a great framework for giving feedback. But as a first line leader, be kind to yourself. Give yourself the grace to prepare, because the most important people in your world at work are your people. And if you invest in them and develop them, they will repay you with loyalty, they will repay you with trust, and they will repay you with brilliance of execution like you would never, ever see yourself.
I love that. So you referenced your career journey and kind of starting in sales. You have a really unique journey, and I'd love for you to share that with the listener. You were in the military and then found your way into sales. Talk a little bit about that, and then I'd love to know how that's influenced who you are as a leader.
I'd love to tell you at this point that the last 30 years have all been planned out. I started out as however old I was when I left university, and I'd got life mapped out. And the reality is I hadn't. And I'm still trying to figure out what I do when I grow up, but I kind of like what I do, so why change it? Yeah, so I went through school, I went through university, and I was very fortunate. I then chose to go to Sandhurst, the Royal Military Academy of Sandhurst, which is where the Army sends all of its commissioned officers to learn how to lead. It was a humbling experience. There I was as a sort of a 19-year-old kid. I kind of had these dreams that I'd join the Army and I'd see the world and I'd play lots of sports, because I always loved sport. And I just had this idea that the Army would be adventurous, and I'd be skiing one week and then sailing the next week. I spent my first 3.5 years in Northern Ireland before the peace on operational tour there. I then went to Chester, the Falkland Islands, and I ended up serving in the north of England in a beautiful area of the country, but really not very glamorous at all. Friends of mine went to Belize, to Cyprus, to Hong Kong, and had a very, very different experience. But, the military, I think, yeah, it's chicken and egg. I think I had some biases towards, servant leadership, which I think is very, very important. It's a principle that has stuck with me. And I think there were some biases towards that. But I think the military helped amplify those and cement those in my character. Little things to this day, if you're in a team environment and there's food, one of the things we were drilled into us as a young officer is, I was in the infantry, so it was all men that I was serving with at the time. And it was drilled into you that your men always ate before you did. And if there was nothing left at the end of it, fine. I mean, again, as an infantry officer, the tools of my trade to get the mission done were my people, were my men. And so, of course, they had to be fed first. Of course, they had to be rested first. I had to prioritize them, because, if those tools weren't available, I couldn't achieve the mission by myself. So little principles like that. So to this day, if I'm in a work environment and there's food, I kind of find myself waiting, lingering towards the end of the line, waiting for everybody else to eat. And it's just a habit that I've picked up. Little things like, trying to provide people with clarity. We talked about the mission. We talked about accountability, Tiffany, earlier. It's like being really, really clear about the mission and really clear about, the environment and the freedom that people have to work in. I would say that is, that is framework of discipline and communication that stands, I hope, me in good stead to this day. Because again, most of the time where you get frustrations at work, it's not because people intentionally turn up to do a bad job. It's because maybe they've misunderstood. So I think the discipline of the communication, the discipline of being thoughtful about making sure to the best of our ability, people are equipped with clear frameworks, clear tools, clear understandings, and have access to feedback in an open way when they need help or when they don't need help. I think those are some of the core principles that have sort of stayed with me. And ultimately, if I had to break it down into a very, very simple phrase, it is as simple as this. My job as a leader is to serve my people. That is my only job. And if I'm not doing that with the time that I have available, I need to be questioned why I'm doing it, right? So I serve them, which is a very different mindset than they work for me. I get uncomfortable when people say, yeah, I work for you. No. We work together. I work with you, not for you. And it sounds like such a silly little thing, but for me, it's a fundamental shift in the mentality. And for me, it's all about serving the people that I'm lucky enough to lead.
That's really genuine. After seeing you lead teams, that is how you show up to your teams. So it's not something you're just saying, but something you actually put into action.
Yeah, same. Totally agree. Again, we have the benefit of both being able to have worked with you in our careers. I'm curious though, Andy, you mentioned that, you didn't have all 30 years of your career mapped out. How is everything changing for you in the last 6 months? I mean, remote work is 5 years old now at this point. So like that's kind of old news and that's its own topic. But even the introduction of AI and the amount of tools that people have available changes how they show up to work and how they think about the discretionary work they need to do. How are you applying those principles you just discussed in your current role, and how have things changed?
It's funny, Tiffany, just on that first point, I think actually we're coming full circle on the whole hybrid remote. I do see strong evidence that people are falling back in love with in-person meetings. And so for anybody that's in a revenue role, when you've got an opportunity to go out and meet with a prospective client or an existing customer and have that coffee time, have that in-person experience, go grab it. Because if you do that and the competition doesn't, you psychologically, you've already got a bit of a leg up, right?
Oh, 100. As a buyer of a lot of software, relationships matter. Like I will prioritize a strong working relationship, and that starts by showing up. Someone we work with showed up at a WeWork in Seattle yesterday to meet with me and a few of the team members, and it makes a huge difference being in person.
The biggest thing there is it's all about time.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, time is the one most precious resource that we all have. We will never get this time together again. Well, we might do in a repeat show, but this particular moment that we're sharing today, we're choosing to invest it here versus something else. So that time, I think, speaks volumes. But coming back to the broader question, gosh, where do you start with AI, right? I mean, there's a lot of buzz around it. There's a lot of noise about it. I think where we are at the moment is that it is very much a better together story.
Mm-hmm.
It is very much a story of amplifying human work and elevating human work. And I share a couple of examples there. But the long story short is, if you're in a revenue role and you're not already using some of the tools that are out there, you're probably at a disadvantage because your competitors, your peers, other people in your network will be using it. So I would say embrace it, but understand that it is a tool to enhance your capabilities, not to replace them. So, for example, forgive me a moment, it's one example that comes into my mind, the 6Sense platform, we've got AI-driven capabilities there that are all about designing and executing campaigns, multi-channel campaigns at scale on an individualized basis. AI frees people from doing the data work, the data manipulation, and what that allows people to do is to spend time thinking about the strategy. what is the experience I want to deliver for this audience versus this audience, and how do I optimize that? Knowing that the AI will take care of all of the other stuff that used to take hundreds of hours of people's time, right? Taking data extracts, matching that in, deduplicating stuff, endless meetings. So I think AI is an incredibly powerful tool, and when it's used best, it elevates us into those areas that are still uniquely human, and they're typically around creativeness and strategy.
I think that's an amazing perspective. I got asked by someone the other day, like, is AI going to make us all stupid? And I was like, absolutely not. And the reason I think that is I just see it in my own day to day. Because I'm not doing some of the manual tasks I was doing before, I actually am freed up to do deep thinking and deep work and deep strategy that you didn't have time for before. And so I do think you have to be intentional about, okay, I'm taking these things off my plate. How am I going to make space, block my calendar, like you talked before, to actually do the deep strategy work that we now hopefully have time to do?
Yeah, and here's a really simple way of thinking about it. There have been significant moments of change in human history. And if we only look back to some of those moments, the agricultural and industrial revolution, the Renaissance era, when we went from being sort of hunter-gatherers to farmers as a species, what all those things did over time was they changed the experience of being human. They changed what we had to spend our time on versus what we could spend our time on. And so I don't buy into this, it's going to make us stupid. I don't buy into this, we're all going to be out of a job, at least not during my career, right? Who knows what will happen in the future? What I do buy into is that it is an opportunity to do different things. And if you can take me out of the laborious, manual, tedious data manipulation, reporting, and allow me to spend more time thinking about what that means, and then discussing and deciding what we're going to do about it, for me, that's intellectually way more rewarding than actually doing the data manipulation. So I think AI is a really powerful tool. I encourage people to embrace it, but I also encourage people to make sure that you're checking what it comes back with against, the gray matter that's in your head, because ultimately, as a human being, that's the unique capability that we still have that I think AI is quite a long way off replacing.
So I spent some time looking at some of your recent LinkedIn posts, seeing what you've been talking about. And one thing that you have talked about is the importance of having an inclusive culture, especially at Sixth Sense where you're at today. I know this about you, seeing you as a leader, that you take creating and fostering an inclusive culture very seriously. When there aren't a ton of programs supporting you in that at some organizations, how would you recommend a leader create an inclusive workplace? And what's worked for you, and how have you seen that done, and what's effective?
We both had the great pleasure of working with Jill Feliciano, who is just a huge inspiration
Yes.
to me, and she is, and I think she's somebody that I continue to look up to and learn from. And I think that one thing I've come to realize is that so often we focus about diversity in whatever shape or form it might be, the visible, the non-visible. I'd argue that the place to start is actually not with the composition of the room. I'd argue that the place to start is coming back to that psychological safety, coming back to that sense of belonging. Because, if you do not have that sense of belonging within a team, you can do a brilliant job of bringing in people with diverse views from diverse backgrounds that maybe aren't like the other people in the room. But unless those people feel safe and able to express their opinions, what you'll get is a revolving door. The people will come in, they'll find it hard to settle, that they won't feel that sense of belonging. And at some point, the smart ones are going to say, actually, life's too short. I deserve more than this. I'm going to go find a place where I do belong. So I think the first place to start is figuring out, how do you as a leader create the space where people do feel comfortable to bring their whole self to work? How can you in meetings, make sure that you're allowing all of the voices to be heard. And remember, some of our colleagues don't like to talk. Some of them like to submit stuff in writing or use other forms of communications. Thinking about how you can be intentional about that, but understanding that none of us are perfect. But what we can do is to make a commitment. What we can do is observe the room and understand who is contributing, whose voice haven't we heard, and how do we create, either in the room or as a follow-up, as a fast follow, how do we make sure that that person, they feel that their contribution is made? So I think it starts with belonging. And then you can start to look at solving for, do we have diverse views? And how and where do we need to change that? But if you don't have the belonging piece, I think you're going to find, particularly where people come in with a different perspective, it's quite easy for those people to not feel comfortable and maybe for their voice never to be heard, only for them to maybe bounce out. So that's where it starts for me.
I think when you talk about that, one of the things, and Kelly said this earlier, you're extremely authentic. We've both gotten to work with you, so we can vouch for that. That this is how you lead, but um, that psychological safety, like those are great tips for when you're in the room. But I think a lot of leaders, I've witnessed them fall flat when they try to only apply tips like that in those settings, and it doesn't come off as authentic or genuine. And you don't only not only are you not creating psychological safety, like you're moving so far on the other side of the pendulum. Like people don't want to lean into you because it feels inauthentic in how you're presenting. And so much of that, like while the tips in the room are important, it starts with how you show up every day, including one-on-ones when no one else is watching how you're leading with your people.
Nobody wants grandstanding. Nobody. It's the biggest turnoff in the world, grandstanding. We've all seen it. People, even with good intention,
Yeah.
even with the best of intention, feel that they've got to make this big statement. No, actually, what people want is consistency, right? Is consistency of how you turn up every single day. I remember, there's a really good psychometric test, psychological test called the STI framework, I think it is. And the most exciting thing that I found about that test was it doesn't just sort of place you in terms of your characteristics, your preferences, but it also provides you with a measure of how those behaviors can change when you're under pressure. And it does it basically through an arrow. So you might be on this point on the graph, and then when you come under pressure, you might move a little bit, you might move a lot, and I, for example, I get a little bit more process oriented. One of the things that you may both, I hope, have experienced about me is my arrow is like really tiny.
Yeah.
Right. When I'm under stress, yeah, I change a bit, but my behaviors don't actually change an awful lot. And I think what that I'm blessed with is that means that, whether you like me or not, I'm fairly consistent in how I turn up. And those consistent, whether you like me or not, coming back to the point that we're talking about here, consistency of how you turn up every single day. The micro actions are way more important and build way more trust over time than the big grandstanding.
So pivoting back a little bit to AI, it's been a topic Kelly and I've been talking about with a lot of people here. I think the two are actually fairly intertwined. Like we have to be inclusive of it. Like it's almost another diverse thought, and you have to treat it like not as an individual. That's too far. Kelly knows, like I don't agree with like being nice to AI at all. I'm very anti any pleases and thank yous. But it's like another way of thinking or another lever to like increase the thought leadership that you have or challenge your own point of view. And I think that it's going to have a pretty big impact for the people who use it correctly. And you said amplify it in the market. They're going to amplify the way they think or how they use it. I'm curious what you think the most significant impacts that it will have on B2B sales are in the coming months. Years might be too far out at this point at the rate of change that we have.
I think there are a few areas, and we're already seeing this already, Tiffany. It's like, there is zero excuse now for not turning up onto a sales call. Imagine that first call you've got with a prospective customer. There is no excuse to be anything other than fully informed about their business. AI, even some of the generic tools, right? Like a Claude or a Chat GPT, with fairly simple prompts, you can, within seconds, get back information that through the vast majority of my sales career was really hard to get. You had to laboriously read quarterly earnings reports and things like that. I mean, those days are, so far behind us. So I think, what does that do? Well, for me, this what excites me about this is having that knowledge allows me to then come into a first call type environment with a perspective on your business and where my business can add value.
Mhm.
And the ability to lead with something that is really powerful and impactful, I think is genuinely enhanced by AI. So if nothing else, make sure you're using AI to do your account research so that you turn up with that perspective. You can use AI to help craft that perspective.
Yeah.
So understanding the challenges of the business, understand where your business have solved for similar challenges like that before with examples. And then you can use AI to surface that. So you can even have like some hints and prompts to say, hey, Tiffany, when I talk to businesses like you that are looking at global expansion, here are 3 common challenges that we often see. A, B, C, D. Tell me, where are you on that journey? And it just allows an acceleration of that entire process. And the people that are enhancing that are creating a differential experience. And you never get a second chance to make a first impression. So make that first impression count and use AI to help you do so.
Yeah.
Another area that I'm particularly passionate about, forecasting. Oh my goodness, forecasting is so difficult at scale, right? A single deal is hard enough, but when you're managing 100 deals or whatever it might be in a quarter, how do you do that? One of the things I'm really loving around some of the revenue AI and technologies that are out there is how they're using AI to interrogate all of the CRM data, all of the call recording data, all of the email and other communication data, and then surface that in a way that I can interrogate it as a sales leader without necessarily always going to my managers or to my individual reps. So I'm really, really excited about that because it helps me, again, get way better at, forecasting accurately. And there's one thing I've learned that you need to do as a leader, sales leader, to keep
Yeah.
your job. One thing, get your forecast accurate. Doesn't matter if people like the number or not, just get an accurate number.
Yeah. It's true.
Forecasting, an art. So one question I did want to ask you, because you are our first global guest as well, so not based in the US, based in the UK. You've had a ton of unique experiences in that you've worked for a lot of US based companies with offices in EMEA. Started those offices, you've started offices in Australia. If you're talking to a company that is thinking about expanding outside of the US market or North American market, what's one piece of advice that you would give them? Or what mistakes are you typically seeing them make that you can maybe help them avoid?
Gosh, on peak. Can I give a list?
Yeah. Go for it.
I think there's a bunch of things. Number one,
This will
right?
be our second episode. We'll do another
Yeah.
episode just on
It's a
this
full
later.
episode on global.
You could write a whole book. Maybe I should. The first thing, let's narrow it down, right? There's a lot of the globe outside of North America. Let's just narrow it down to Europe, right? And Europe is not the same as EMEA, Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So therein lies the first piece of advice. Understand that Europe and EMEA is not a single entity. In Europe, we've got 27 countries, each of which has a somewhat unique or an entirely unique language, each of which have cultural ways in which decisions are made. Broadly in the Nordics, you'll find that decisions are usually a bit more consensus based. Everybody has a voice, which is interesting. You think about buying cycles now, right? They've got way more complex with way more people. And actually, we're all learning that buyers buy in groups and they buy through consensus. So we've all kind of shifted to the Nordics model, I would say. In Germany, there is a bias to having a much stronger burden of evidence, right? That the appetite for risk is much, much lower, and so on and so forth. So the first piece of advice, Europe is not one market. There are cultural differences that as an organization you need to understand and adapt to in order to maximize your success. The second lesson off the back of that is be crystal clear about which markets you want to go after. Be really, really, really clear and hold firm to that, because there will always be that big opportunity in France that you could go and get. But if you're not set up to service customers in France, with to be able to do contracts in France, to be able to serve them in their native tongue, you may find that the cost, the juice is not worth the squeeze, right? So be really crystal clear on the markets you want to go after. And then I think the third thing is go look across your customer base. Where have you got existing customers that can help take you in as those lighthouse customers that are going to help amplify your voice? And if you don't have customers, maybe go find some partners, right? Because they will both accelerate and amplify your work in a way that just hiring people and putting them on the ground won't do that.
Yeah. I love the partner advice. We just had we talked to Bill Glenn a few episodes back. If anyone listened to that one, but we spent a whole episode on partners because it's so key to scale. And I think especially in the European market, it's a huge piece of success.
Well, they have the market knowledge, they have the relationships, and they have the cultural understanding and trust.
Yeah.
So it's like, you'd be crazy not to use them, right?
Yeah, exactly. Andy, we are wrapping up our time with you. We always love when our guests leave us with a question that makes us form our own point of view or some thought leadership on a topic. What question can you leave Kelly, myself, a listener with to take away from this episode?
I think that I'm going to go back to something that's people centric, right? Probably no surprise to either of you, or maybe to people on the call having listened to this, because I truly believe that people are the superpower, and we as leaders are privileged to work with them every day. And I'm going to go back to that piece around inclusivity and belonging, because I fundamentally believe if you create that environment where people feel included, where they feel a sense of belonging, where they feel a sense of psychological safety, you will get the best from them. And people surprise me every day with their brilliance and with their hard work. And so I would say the question I would ask people is, as they reflect maybe at the end of the day or over their coffee in the morning, it's look around your team. Look around the people that you work with, either virtually or in person. And in those everyday team meetings and interactions, really observe deeply around who is contributing, around the individual dynamics of the room. And be acutely aware of those that are more vocal, but especially aware who is contributing less, whose contributions have perhaps changed over time, and what might be causing that. And then be intentional about creating that experience of belonging for those people. And I think if you do that, again, you'll be surprised by the brilliance that they'll bring. So that's what I'd ask. Go reflect on the meetings, be observant in a meeting next week, and just take notes and think deeply about, are there people whose behaviors have changed? Are there people whose voices are not heard as often? And how can you as a leader create the space where those voices are heard?
Yeah. That's a great challenge to, I think, all leaders out there, and a good reminder to be aware and think through that.
I'm jumping straight into my team meeting after this, so I'm going to put it right to use, Andy, directly to use.
Would you do me a big favor and let me know how it goes? I'd love to hear.
Of course. I mean, even just this conversation makes me reflect on how much of my leadership principles have come from working with you in the past. And I share a number of things, and I think they're a direct result of the time we spent together. And so, but yes, I'm going to be very conscious about it in the next 15 minutes when I jump into that meeting.
I want to hear all about it.
Andy, this was so fun. Thank you for joining us on the Revenue Insiders.
We loved having you.
So great to have you here. And we'll have to do another episode just on global. We will make sure to do that. We'll pull you in next season.
Yeah. Well, maybe we'll have a poll. We'll vote. Is it global or is it more leadership? Because I feel like maybe like another hour.
They always intertwine with Andy.
I know. That's true.
Well, thanks everyone for listening. If you have not gone on to Apple or Spotify or YouTube and given us a rating, we would greatly appreciate it so we can reach more listeners like you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone.
If you're enjoying the Revenue Insiders, we'd love your support. Follow us, rate, and leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Your feedback helps us grow and reach more listeners like you.